picture. Air Force One leaving Omaha, Nebraska, headed back to Washington, D.C. That word coming just a short while ago that the president was indeed headed back here. He had been in Sarasota, Florida earlier today when he got word of the attacks at the World Trade Center and then the Pentagon. And then he was taken to Shreveport, Louisiana, at the Air Force Base there, where he made his remarks about the attacks.
Then he went to Nebraska.
Then to Nebraska, and now to here.
Now, the First Lady, Laura Bush, was supposed to testify this morning before a Senate Committee on Education chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. But because of the attacks, the hearing was postponed. Mrs. Bush and Senator Kennedy spoke to reporters.
All of us reach out as Americans to the brave rescue workers that are attempting to help our fellow citizens. We, out of respect for those efforts, have postponed our hearing this morning. We underline the point that it is postponed. We are not going to see the business of America deferred because of terrorism.
You heard from the President this morning, and Senator Kennedy and Senator Gregg and I both joined his statement in saying that our hearts and our prayers go out to the victims of this act of terrorism, and that our support goes to the rescue workers, and all of our prayers are with everyone there right now. Thank you all.
Is there a message you could tell to the nation's...
Well, parents need to reassure their children everywhere in our country that they're safe.
That was Mrs. Bush. That was Senator Judd Gregg of New Hampshire, to Mrs. Bush's right. After that news conference, Mrs. Bush, Senator Kennedy, Senator Gregg, and the rest of the congressional leadership went to undisclosed secure locations.
One of the things that we're dealing with right now is the need for blood, especially because of the situation in New York. They're expecting thousands of casualties there. On the phone with us right now is Kelly Alexander with the Red Cross. Ms. Alexander, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
Can you bring us up to date on the situation for us locally, first of all, in terms of the need for blood?
Well, right now, for the American Red Cross, from our standpoint, we are well prepared to supply the blood that is needed in the area. We actually have 50,000 units of blood that we are working with state and local officials to get out to D.C. and to New York. So right now, we are not making an emergency appeal for blood. We feel that we're well prepared. If people have appointments scheduled to donate blood in the next day or the next few weeks, we encourage them to keep those appointments because we anticipate that we may be called on, for that amount of time or maybe even longer to help with situations for the victim.
Is that 50,000, you think, going to be enough? At this point, you're really not sure about the number of casualties or even the need for blood, rather, in the New York area.
Right. At this point, we're not totally sure. We expect there, is going to be a need. We have officials that have been in contact with emergency services there, so we are prepared to help out in any way we can. But again, at this point, we don't see a need for an emergency appeal.
All right. Kelly Alexander with the American Red Cross. We thank you.
Thank you.
We have a look at, let's go back to the Pentagon now, and Dave Statter, where, of course, it's still smoking over there, I guess, Dave.
Yeah, the new information, let me show you what's going on here now. As you see this line of vehicles going down toward the Pentagon, they're from Montgomery County. The Urban Search and Rescue Team from Montgomery County just arrived under a police escort of Montgomery County police officers. These are Montgomery County Fire and Rescue workers on the ride-on bus, plus their heavy equipment. In front of them, and I'm not sure if you can quite see them now, are some large rigging devices, large construction equipment. Large construction equipment that has arrived here now to go through that rubble. And again, sadly, most firefighters predict that this will be a recovery rather than a rescue operation, but certainly they're going to try to hold out hope. They have to get in there at some point when the fire is put under control. They're still fighting fire here. There's still smoke coming out of the roof of this building at either end of where the crash site occurred. Now, I understand we're going to go to some amateur video shot earlier today, probably about the same time we arrived at the Pentagon, if somebody can show us that. I don't believe that's it. Well, that may be it. These are some of the people who were injured. Okay, this is the amateur video, which pretty much what we showed you earlier today of some of the burned people who arrived, or who were here as soon as we arrived, people who were seriously burned. And this was the fire at 9:45 this morning when the plane crashed into the Pentagon on the heliport side. Rescue operations began immediately. We've heard of one Army captain who just went in there to help his colleagues, pulled out some injured and burned people, and himself had his hands burned, was sent to the hospital reluctantly, and supposedly is back here helping out. But the news right now is that the urban search and rescue team from Montgomery County has now joined their colleagues from Fairfax County on the scene. They're getting closer to the Pentagon. The fire, we haven't seen flames in a while, but still a great deal of smoke coming off the roof of the building. That area to the right of the big gaping hole there is the newer portion of the Pentagon. We're told that those offices are sparsely populated. They're just moving back into those offices, and they do have up-to-date fire equipment. Most of the fire burned toward the left side of the hole, continued to travel up a great distance there to where you should see shortly some smoke that's still coming out up, there. That's how far away the fire traveled. We've talked to firefighters who've fought fires in the Pentagon before, and they describe it as a maze, a very difficult situation trying to travel these corridors when they're filled with smoke. That's difficult for trained firefighters. Imagine what it was like for the people working in the Pentagon this morning.
Dave, you can get lost in that building when there's no fire. It's a very confusing building unless you know it.
Absolutely. And those firefighters who fought fires, I'm told there was one back in 1959. I believe there was one in the 60s or 70s that went on for hours and hours. And the big problem firefighters had is they got lost in there, didn't know where they were. I think there's better communications now and they have a better idea, but still they're having a tough problem because the fire just spread so quickly. And the big news here is we still cannot tell you how many people are unaccounted for, how many people may be in there dead.
And when everybody's there, what, about 24,000 people?
24,000, I understand, a number of employees. This happened at 9:38 this morning, right, Dave?
9:38 is one time. I've heard 9:45. The collapse occurred. We looked at our time code on when Mike Fromell was taping it. 10:17 is when it collapsed, about 30 minutes later.
Now, Dave, the name Osama bin Laden keeps coming up in terms of these terrorist attacks. But earlier today, the spiritual leader of the Taliban in Afghanistan, Mullah Omar, said that Osama bin Laden could not have been responsible for this because it was so complex. But in any case, U.S. officials, a couple of them now, are now saying that they do suspect Osama bin Laden, which is the name that always comes up in these things. Right,
and tomorrow was the day that a judge in New York had scheduled sentencing for an accomplice of Osama bin Laden's for attacks at the World Trade Center, or rather Tanzania, the bombings in Tanzania. In 1998. That sentencing was scheduled for tomorrow in New York at a courtroom very close to the World Trade Center.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Well, it's been a very frightening day for people all across the country. New York City erupted into chaos before 9 o'clock this morning as thousands of people ran for safety from terrorism attacks at the World Trade Center. 2 planes were intentionally flown into the upper floors of the World Trade Center towers, causing both of them to explode into flames and collapse. And as those towers burned and began to crumble, people inside the World Trade Center were hanging out of the windows, some of them trying to jump to safety. There are no confirmed figures yet on the number of injured, dead, or survivors, but estimates from New York say there may be thousands of people dead.
Here in Washington, a 3rd plane intentionally flown into the Pentagon. A 4th aircraft also crashed outside of Pittsburgh, also hijacked. You're watching continuing coverage of the terrorist attacks.
Stay with us. Our live team coverage of this day continues right now on 9 Eyewitness News at 5.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
This is being seen on Capitol Hill as another Pearl Harbor.
Devastating. I've never covered anything like this in my life. That building literally became a bomb itself. No one had a chance to do anything to save themselves.
These are the worst attacks on the U.S. mainland in modern history.
They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy.
A day of terror strikes the United States. Welcome to a special edition of 9 Eyewitness News at 5. I'm Gravir Dinza.
I'm Gordon Peterson. September 11th will forever be remembered as the date of the worst terrorist attack on American soil in American history. It's going to take days to know just how many have been killed, but already the estimates are in the thousands. The attack came in 3 waves, beginning just before 9 this morning. 2 hijacked aircraft slammed into the World Trade Center, followed by a crash into the Pentagon here in Washington, and then not long after that, word came of a plane crash outside Pittsburgh. The first images that came just before 9 this morning, one of the jets crashed into the World Trade Center. Minutes later, This is unbelievable. Happened again. Another passenger jet slammed into a New York City landmark. And then after 10 this morning, with fires burning out of control and people jumping out of windows, the Twin Towers actually collapsed. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani says the death toll will be more than any of us can bear. Then the Pentagon in Arlington takes a direct hit. The nerve center of the nation's military bursts into flames after it, too, was struck by a hijacked plane. Fire burned out of control. Injured workers rushed to area hospitals, great billows of smoke drifting skywards toward the Potomac and beyond. We're being hijacked. We're being hijacked. Those were the frantic words of a passenger in an emergency cell phone call from yet another hijacked plane. That plane, a Boeing 757, would crash moments later in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The frantic caller, who said he was locked in the plane's bathroom, repeatedly told the dispatcher, "This call is not a hoax." The whole building shook. Those were the words of a Pentagon worker talking about today's terrorist attack.
An incredible fire broke out and one entire side of the five-sided structure collapsed. Dave Statter has the very latest in this live report. Dave, they're still battling that fire, which began at 9:38.
I'd like to tell you that the smoke has not stopped coming out of this building. It's lighter smoke, which is always good news, but still here there's smoke coming out of the Pentagon. Let's take a close-up look of what happened here today. The gaping hole that's on the west side of the Pentagon. This is in front of the Pentagon helipad. That's where the plane hit. It was 9:38 this morning, and let's go to some videotape shot at 9:38 this morning. This is what it looked like as the fuel from that jet burned on the outside of the building and spread that fire into the building and making it so difficult. There were many people injured then. Many people probably lost their lives immediately besides those on the plane. We just don't have an accurate account. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was among those, we are told, outside helping those who were injured. Admiral Craig Quigley, who is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, says this was a full assault on the United States of America. There's no way to prepare for this. But Tory Clark, the spokesperson for the Pentagon, tells us that Pentagon personnel went to work right away helping the injured. Let's look at what happened about 30 to 35 minutes later, our next tape. This is when this whole area collapsed. It did not collapse immediately. It took about 35 minutes. That hole then formed in the Pentagon. Firefighters went to work right away, putting out the fire, but of course looking for those who may have survived this. A couple people were immediately rescued from the scene with serious burns. They were medevaced out of here by medevac helicopters. More ambulances arrived, some 30 people taken to Arlington Hospital from here, still fighting this fire, which has basically gotten into the very center courtyard of this building, under the roof line here. It certainly looks better than it did earlier as far as firefighting operations. Now let's hear from some eyewitnesses who were here when this all happened.
It was a massive explosion and absolute chaos afterwards.
This is a travesty beyond belief.
We heard it happen and everything shook and the ceiling started to fall. And, I thought it was because there's generators and things. We just thought something, there was a malfunction, something exploded.
All right, we're here live now with Harold Schaeferger, who is the General President of the International Association of Firefighters, a man I've known for quite a few years. Basically, he's going to give an update on New York. What do you know about injured firefighters and dead firefighters in New York?
Dave, I've been in touch with both of my locals. Obviously, the results are going to be devastating. I don't want to make a prediction yet. I know there were literally scores of firefighters in both of those buildings doing search and rescue, doing fire attack when the buildings collapsed. It is so horrific. It may reach a couple of hundred or more.
That's just firefighters, not
just firefighters. I'm sure we're looking at thousands, certainly maybe in excess of 10,000 civilians. The devastation up there is beyond belief.
And you're getting this information based on people you've been talking to in New York?
I've been in touch with my two affiliates and the leadership on the ground there. Our firefighters who are actually at the scene.
Your thoughts today?
Our nation's at war. It'll be something we will remember as my father remembered Pearl Harbor. My members are right now doing the work on the ground. They are America's domestic soldiers who have been fighting this battle since 8:45 this morning.
And they continue here at the Pentagon?
And they're in there fighting right now, and they'll continue to do so until this is under control.
That's the first numbers we've heard from New York, Gordon and Gavir.
Yeah.
Estimated deaths of firefighters in the hundreds. That's just firefighters alone who were there for the rescue operations. And we heard one senior official, possibly very high up in the New York City Fire Department.
Right. All right, Dave Statter, thanks. A lot of those people injured at the Pentagon were taken to Virginia Hospital Center. There's a news conference underway. Let's go there.
EMS personnel that were injured on the scene.
How many EMS personnel that are injured are here now?
I think there's been a total of 5 EMS personnel that have been treated here thus far, and none of them have been admitted to my knowledge. There are currently 3 being treated now with relatively minor injuries.
Are you expecting more coming in? You said you have 36 now. That's a new number.
Right. At this point, we expect some additional persons, and we're certainly staffing ourselves to handle a large influx if necessary. But the word we have from the scene is that there are no large numbers of patients that they expect to transport in the near future.
Are they confirm any fatalities that may have occurred yet?
We have no registered fatalities that have come to our hospital, but I cannot speak to what's been seen on the scene.
Are they still in surgery, some patients?
There are 2 patients still in surgery.
Is that the femur and the hand?
That's correct.
All right, so the nature of the injuries, broken bones, burns?
Yeah, as I mentioned previously, the injuries that we have been seeing are not unexpected in a blast-type injury or a blast-type event. There's smoke inhalation problems. There's some trauma-related problems to the actual blast itself, as well as injury due to falling debris and so forth, and a fair number of actual burns, 1st through 3rd degree burns.
Anything else new to report at this hour?
That's about it. I just wanted to give you the updated numbers, and we are currently on disaster mode here at the hospital, though we're going to evaluate that in a meeting shortly.
Okay, you've been listening to Dr. Sverha. He is with the emergency services here at Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington. Again, the number has now risen. It's 36 people who have been admitted, who have come to the hospital, and they had 13 admitted before. I think that number has gone up to 16. Of that number, of those people who have been admitted, they do have 8 people in intensive care, and at last count there were 4 people on ventilators. The most severe injuries, of course, they're talking about broken bones and somebody in surgery. We're not sure specifically what that was for, but also smoke inhalation and that sort of thing. We also want to let you know that it's really slow to a trickle at this point. They don't expect any more people, but the last time I told you that, you saw 2 ambulances pull in behind me. The last person was a firefighter who came from the Pentagon. We did confirm that both of those ambulances were carrying people from the Pentagon. One of them was a firefighter. Also, all day today, we've been telling you about donating blood, and I just got off the telephone. I'm flipping my pad here to let you know what I found out. Hundreds and hundreds of volunteers have called up the Inova Health Services blood bank, and they now have a 4 to 5 hour wait. There are so many people that want to give blood right now. They say they're open for 24 hours. That is indefinitely. If you would like to donate blood, and again, there's a shortage of many supplies, including blood, specifically type O, the universal donor, they're asking you to come 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, midnight, sometime overnight, and they will accommodate you because they are staying open indefinitely. 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. That will allow you to go down to Gallows and Woodburn Road in Fairfax County. It's in Annandale, just outside the Beltway at 3289 Woodburn Road if you would like to donate blood. They're also taking plasma and platelets. Regular blood donations take about an hour, a little bit longer for plasma and platelets. They are delivering to 11 hospitals throughout the D.C. area, but they say if New York needs it, New York will also get it. So there is a tremendous need, of course. We don't have any any fatalities here at this hospital, but we do know where Dave Statter is tonight, there are definitely fatalities, and so many scores more in New York. So the blood is something that will be needed for those casualties. That's the very latest here from Arlington Hospital. Back to you guys at Broadcast House.
Jennifer Ryan reporting 36 people treated. That's a relatively small number, and it's in a sense a discouraging number, because when you look at the damage to the E ring on the west side of the Pentagon there, it reminds you of Oklahoma City and the way the floors collapsed.
In other words,
they went this way.
In other words, those people inside, we don't know. We don't know. We've been talking a lot about security, Gordon, and word just coming now on the Associated Press that Crawford, Texas, which is where the President and Mrs. Bush have their 1,600-acre ranch, security has been tightened around Crawford, Texas. The Secret Service isn't saying a whole lot, but apparently state troopers have been posted there, and they're checking vehicles coming in and around that area.
Yeah, the President's on his way back to Washington, we understand they're flying the flag at half-staff at the White House right now, as you can see. You can also see, if you look closely, in the center there, the snipers up on the roof, the manpower. There were always people on the roof of the White House, but we understand the manpower has been increased since this this disaster. And look at this scene. I mean, it's very serene. If you just tuned in, you had no idea what has occurred in New York and here in Washington, D.C.
But we do know that states of emergency have been declared in Virginia and Maryland and in Washington, D.C. as well. Mayor Tony Williams, as I said, declared a state of emergency in the district.
City officials have been working with the FBI and the Secret Service since right after the first plane crash at the World Trade Center. Mayor Williams spoke to the press this afternoon.
The state of emergency has been declared to ensure that in the event we have an incident, in the event the worst were to happen, we are completely prepared and ready to act. Right now, I would characterize our actions, and certainly this press conference is part of that, is simply putting all of our citizens in our city on the highest state of alert.
Well, that's Mayor Williams in D.C., and also there are states of emergency in Virginia and in Maryland.
Well, the famous Twin Towers of the World Trade Center used to be one of the first things you saw as you approached New York City from Washington.
Not anymore. Today's terrorist attacks have altered New York City's famous skyline. Mayor Rudy Giuliani says the exact numbers of dead and injured probably will not be known until sometime tomorrow, even the next day. Gretchen Carlson has more now from New York City.
Another Pearl Harbor. Two hijacked commercial airliners deliberately flown into New York's World Trade Center towers.
I basically got on all fours and I just crawled to the door, hoping that I was crawling the right way.
The well-coordinated terrorist attack left gaping holes in the skyscrapers and both towers in flames. Thousands are injured and a still untold number of people are dead. Just a short while after the planes hit, both towers crumbled.
We're watching the people fall from the building, and then we just saw the whole side of the World Trade Center just fall right off, and it caught a couple of us, and we just made a mad dash all the way down here.
Hundreds of bystanders on the streets of Lower Manhattan were covered in soot. Many in panic as they unexpectedly witnessed the worst terrorist attack in the history of this country.
It's war. It's declared war, and we need to now pull together as a nation.
The people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our support for all the people that were viciously attacked today by going about their lives and showing everyone that vicious, cowardly terrorists can't stop us.
FBI officials confirm 4 commercial flights were hijacked this morning, with 2 of the planes being flown directly into the World Trade Center target.
50,000 people work in the World Trade Center buildings, but it's impossible to know how many of those people may have been inside when the attack happened, or how many total people are dead. Gretchen Carlson, CBS News, New York.
Joining us now from our newsroom is Mr. Hussein Ibish, who is the Director of Communications for the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. Mr. Ibish's committee is in the business of keeping us in the media honest in terms of scapegoating and things of that nature after a tragedy of this sort. Mr. Ibish, what are your concerns after this?
Well, I think the Arab American community shares exactly the same emotions that the rest of this country does. We are shocked, we are very, very angry, we're bewildered. We're appalled, and I think we regard it universally as an attack on all Americans without exception. And so we share every single emotion that our fellow Americans do. But we also have some anxiety about blame being attached to Arabs in general, Muslims in general, or something like that, even though there's no indication whatever of who's responsible, and even though collective blaming and collective responsibility is obviously wrong. Already we've had reports from Detroit and some serious incidents in Philadelphia that are of great concern. And
what kind of incidents in Philadelphia?
There have been a couple of attacks on stores, and Arab American-owned businesses have been attacked and ransacked. And you know, the reports are still coming in, but I know it was serious enough for the Arab American community in Philadelphia to have already had a press conference appealing for calm, to ask for police protection for mosques and prominent Arab businesses. And it's terribly sad because you know, our community feels exactly the same pain as every other American. Plus we experience this immediate blaming from a small group of people, but still you know, when there's no knowledge whatever of who did this or why.
The two top government officials, U.S. government officials, have already used the name Osama bin Laden.
They're speculated, and it's normal to speculate, it's human to speculate, as long as we all remember that speculation is just that, and that the facts will be known. This is obviously a massive conspiracy of the most dastardly and evil variety, but it must have been on a huge scale, and so I'm sure that police work and law enforcement work will shortly uncover a trail, and we'll know sooner rather than later who it is who did this. And I think it's very important for all of us to come together to bring the criminals to justice. However, you know, to assume necessarily that this is people from one group or another, or even one ethnic group or religion or another, is a mistake. We should remember that when the Oklahoma City bombing occurred, people were quick to assume that it was done by groups based outside the United States, possibly in the Middle East or in Afghanistan, and it turned out to be, unfortunately, homegrown terrorists. So we really don't know at this point, and I think we all need to allow law enforcement to do its job and just support our government in bringing these heinous murderers to justice as soon as possible.
Mr. Ibish, I assume you've seen the videotape of Palestinians rejoicing about these events?
I saw that. I've also seen the statements by every single Palestinian political leader condemning this attack, and I know that the overwhelming number of people in the Middle East, Arab Americans and Palestinians, are absolutely appalled by this. There may be a small minority of people in one neighborhood of one Palestinian town who reacted in a truly despicable way, you know, because of their own pain and suffering over the last 11 months with 600 dead unarmed civilians and what have you. It's indefensible, but it's no reflection on the 250 million Arabs or the 1 billion Muslims or the 4 million Arab Americans in this country. So none at all.
So, Mr. Ibish, what do you tell those folks?
Which folks?
The Arab Americans who live in this country.
Yeah.
What do you say to them about what they can expect in the next few days?
Well, obviously we urge caution. We urge everyone to be cautious. We urge people to exercise common sense, and we urge them to report any suspicious incidents to the police and let us know as a civil rights organization. And I think we need to, you know, come forward, as we all have done, and join hands with our fellow Americans in this day of national calamity and work together, all Americans of whatever ethnicity and whatever religion, to make sure that our country is safe from this kind of horrible attack, and to make sure the criminals are brought to justice.
Why do you suppose the United States is such a big target these days?
Well, I mean, it's a target from inside and from outside. So, I mean, I think it's a little hard to know exactly before you know who's done it. It's hard to know what motivated them. I do think the United States, as the great power in the world, does attract attention, and certainly we've seen that there are dissident groups within the country, including people on the right like Mr. McVeigh and others. So, you know, obviously there are jealous people around the world, resentful people around the world, people who don't like our policies, and Americans who object to the federal government and who are simply alienated, like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
All right.
So there are all kinds of motivations, and we need to find out who did it and then bring them to justice as soon as possible.
Mr. Ibish, we thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
I wish it would have been under more pleasant circumstances.
All right, Mr. Ibish, thank you very much. Appreciate your time this afternoon. One of the planes, the one that crashed into the Pentagon, originated at Dulles International. It was headed from there to Los Angeles. It was an American Airlines plane, and our Peggy Fox is at Dulles. Peggy?
Well, Gravir, the fact that one of those hijacked planes originated from Dulles makes a lot of workers here very nervous. Almost all of the workers have gone home. The only people left really are security people. All the non-essential workers were told to leave immediately after the airport was closed. But I'll tell you, security is as tight as it's ever been. Fighter jets crisscrossed directly above Dulles Airport this afternoon. At 10 a.m., all flights were canceled, but the screens were never updated. Everything stopped in its tracks. Planes were left right at the gates as airline crews scurried home or to hotels. Hundreds of travelers, some of whom were just transferring through Dulles, were stranded.
My company has an office in Richmond, Virginia. That's where I was headed, and left this morning 6 o'clock from Omaha. And in flight, maybe 10 minutes out of D.C., we were scheduled to get in about 10 o'clock. They said they were diverting to Dulles, and we landed here, and it's been pretty much a nightmare since then. I mean, just trying to get out of here. But apparently, from what you've just said, I'm lucky to be here.
This young couple had just come from visiting New York City with their 15-month-old twins. They're thankful not to be in New York now, but they just want to get home to Seattle.
We were on the plane getting ready to leave, and that's when they told us what happened, and then they brought us back.
Off.
So now we're waiting to go back to the hotel.
A little nervous about being near the nation's capital?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Where everything's happening, yeah, I don't want to be here, that's for sure.
Was lucky to get a hotel room in the area. I did run into people inside the airport who had great difficulty getting a hotel room. They said all the hotels in the area are filled. Take a look at this Jersey barrier, as it's called, concrete barriers. They've been putting up several of these rows right here in the departure ramp, and there's one below as well, and I see them putting one down the way right as we speak right now. So security looks like it's even increasing here at Dulles Airport, and we're told that this airport's going to be closed at least until noon tomorrow, and we're kind of in a wait-and-see mode right now. I do have a couple of phone numbers for you in case you think you might have a loved one on one of the hijacked planes. American Airlines number is 703-661-5211. 703-661-5211, and United Airlines 1-800-932-8555. 1-800-932-8555. Well, for now, I'm Peggy Fox reporting live at Dulles Airport. Gravir and Gordon, back to you.
All right, Peggy, thank you. You can only imagine what the scene is at Charles de Gaulle and Leonardo da Vinci in France and Leonardo da Vinci Airport in Rome and elsewhere, where people, Americans, are trying to get back. Some of the flights are being rerouted to Canada and so forth, but they're going to have trouble getting out of there.
All of this started about 9:15 this morning Eastern Standard Time, and right now we want to go to a comment from a gentleman who was actually videotaping outside the World Trade Center when the first plane crashed into the building. The second plane, rather, crashed into the building.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help. I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm seeing a couple of clean breaths. That's good.
Let me correct myself quickly. That obviously was video being taken when that second tower came crumbling down to the ground. That was shortly after the second plane crashed into it.
Man shooting amateur video, and obviously he was having trouble breathing and asked a firefighter for a couple of quick hits off his respirator.
And speaking of those firefighters, there were about 200 of them that we're being told, it's on the wires, and also Dave Statter spoke with someone a short while ago, that are still trapped inside the building. They were inside the building trying to rescue people when the building collapsed.
Now we understand that yet another building has collapsed in New York. Do we know what building this is? Well, it's got to be in proximity to one of the two towers, and as
the two towers are gone,
so it's got
Is this a third building now in New York?
This is the third building. We don't know. This is some of the problems of technology, and that is that the pictures advance the facts. It's Building 7 of the World Trade Center, we understand, has collapsed in New York, and there you saw a video of it. And in addition to firefighters, Gravir was referring to the firefighters. There were police officers in there, too, involved in the rescue effort when those two twin towers collapsed. Now we understand Building 7 has gone down in Lower Manhattan. There you can see the dust and debris and smoke as a consequence of that in Lower Manhattan.
Blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks of that area have been cordoned off as a result of what happened earlier this morning. And I guess for good reason, because now this third building collapsed just moments ago.
And, you know, in terms of the fatalities, you know, Rudy Giuliani said this is Building 7 again. We're going to just replay what you've just seen. This is Building 7 in the World Trade Center area is collapsing. Now, whether we don't even know whether this was something that was engineered for safety reasons or it just happened as a consequence of the two collisions this morning, where the two airliners hit the two towers.
We actually are going to go to USA Today Live now. Lauren Ashburn is with Jack Kelly, who is an expert on Osama bin Laden. And Lauren,
well, Jack Kelly was also in Israel, in Jerusalem, when the
suicide bomber.
The suicide bomber went to the pizza parlor, right?
Yes, that's right, Gordon and Gavir. We're on the 22nd floor of 1000 Wilson Boulevard in Arlington, Virginia, and we have watched as the jet crashed into the Pentagon. We were here. Jack Kelly, of course, came into work. He's our foreign correspondent for USA Today, and you're right, was there in Israel. Jack, what can you tell us? What are intelligence sources saying? Is this Osama bin Laden?
At this point, all fingers appear to be pointing towards him. He is the only person with the sophistication and the wealth to carry out something like this.
Is anyone going on the record saying this?
No, nobody at this point will go on the record, but every single law enforcement official is saying it's either state-sponsored or it's Osama bin Laden, and appears to be Osama bin Laden.
What is the FBI doing about this?
They have just launched their largest criminal investigation ever in U.S. history. They have dispatched teams to Washington, to Pennsylvania, and to New York. At the same time, the CIA is going through all of its intelligence over the last couple of weeks, and the National Security Agency the same thing.
And it seems, based on military intelligence, that someone could have dropped the ball. Is that what you're hearing?
At this point, they haven't pointed any fingers at each other, but we're quietly beginning to hear was that, look, we blew it, our intelligence stunk this time. Put it this way, it was so bad that the FBI's anti-terrorist task force, responsible for investigating situations like this, was on a training exercise in Monterey, California at the time of the bombing, and still can't get back to investigate it.
Jack Kelly, Ford correspondent, USA Today. Gordon and Gavir, before we leave you, I just wanted to show you the international edition front page. Here it is, U.S. under attack. Hundreds feared dead as passenger jets destroy New York's World Trade Towers. Hijackers likely piloted planes themselves. Here, the terrorism coverage blanketing TV. And as you mentioned, Gavir, earlier, Major League Baseball canceled, stocks down. And for the first time ever, Tom Curley, the publisher of USA Today, said, we will not have stocks in our newspaper tomorrow.
Lauren, quickly, if Jack is still standing there.
Is Jack still there?
Yes, go right ahead.
Why now? Why now? If in fact, this is Osama bin Laden, why now?
Good question. We don't exactly know why. We are poring over every possible bit of information to find out what is significant about this day. Nobody seems to know why. The only thing we can gather at this point was that all of their plans came together on this point, where they could hijack the certain planes, they could plant car bombs, but nobody seems to know. That is the $64,000 question. We don't know the answer.
Jack, the Mullah Omar, the spiritual leader of the Taliban, was quick to say that this was much too complex an operation for Osama bin Laden.
With all due respect to Sheikh Omar, I disagree. Having met Osama bin Laden's people and having known some of them very, very well, this is the type of activity that they would have planned for and prepared for years, and this has many of the hallmarks of an Osama bin Laden attack.
What is it about these attacks that have his fingerprints on them?
They are so sophisticated, they're so well planned, and he never actually comes out and takes credit for something afterwards. There is nobody out there who could pull off something like this other than Osama.
And apparently this would have had to include somebody who knew how to fly an airplane.
At this point, what they are investigating are looking at 4 separate pilots, or at least 4 separate pilots, who may have been associated with Osama bin Laden and who may have flown for other airlines, who possibly walked into the cockpit, shot the pilots, and then took over the planes.
And how do they get through security at this point?
Good question. At this point, the FBI has seized all the security camera tapes, and they're looking at the tapes as we speak. There are so many questions unanswered in this one. There's only one thing that holds true. Whoever did this really knew what he was doing.
Jack, President Bush earlier said that we are going to hunt down the person responsible for this, and they will have to suffer the consequences. We've talked in the past about how Osama bin Laden is a pretty sneaky devil, and is pretty tough to catch.
There are contingency plans set to go, and the plans have been set to go for several weeks now on what to do if Osama bin Laden were to plan a very large attack. And they've selected targets within Afghanistan, and you can be assured that if it is Osama bin Laden, that the U.S. will probably retaliate, and retaliate massively.
Jack Kelly, USA Today, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And joining us now is Neil Livingstone with American University. Mr. Livingstone is a terrorism expert. Thanks for being with us. Does this have Osama bin Laden's fingerprints?
I'm Gerald Post, George Washington University.
Right, yeah, Tim. I was going
Sorry
to say.
about that, sir.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. The producer tells me in my ear we're going to Livingstone. Sorry about that.
Sorry,
my
Dr.
apologies.
That's fine.
What's your response? What's your reaction
well,
to this?
I did have the opportunity of testifying as an expert witness in the recent federal trial in New York of the presumed Osama bin Laden terrorist twin bombings of our embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. And I very much agree with Mr. Kelly. This has all the hallmarks, including the issue of simultaneous, well-coordinated attacks in two cities at nearly the same time, and multiple attacks in the same city with both the Pentagon and the state here. I'd also like to emphasize the issue that one-time clue, going back to that trial, if I'm not mistaken, the sentencing for that trial is to occur at a courtroom very near the World Trade Center tomorrow.
That's right. Correct. That's correct. That
so that may be one of the timing why now questions that is being raised.
But you have to, I mean, this is a very complex operation. And all kinds of security, all kinds of security problems exist in carrying something like this out, and they managed to breach all of them.
Well, it's remarkably sophisticated, and despite speaking of proportionate response and getting whoever does this, it really makes it clear how against this low-intensity conflict with small groups of people not associated with a state, able to plan in secret in groups that are really relatively impenetrable by our intelligence agencies, how difficult an opponent this is.
Well, it certainly makes a lot of us think how vulnerable we are. Gordon and I were just talking about how these folks breached security at 4 airports.
Yes, I am very struck by that. I chaired for Vice President Bush's Commission on Aviation Safety and Security in the 21st Century, a joint conference several years ago. And one of the themes was aviation terrorism, and the issue of the relative security and the downgrading of this as a target on the one hand, but the impossibility of countering the determined, especially religious belligerent terrorists. I think it's worth emphasizing that religious terrorism